textures in Blender. Previously, we discussed procedural textures, which is the first type of texture. The second type of texture is the image texture. As I mentioned before, they are textures stored in image file formats such as PNG, JPEG, and so on. There are multiple ways to bring an image texture into Blender. If you are in the shader editor, you can use the Add menu up here, then choose the Texture submenu, and then Image Texture. Or you can also press Shift-A, Textures, then Image Texture. For faster workflow, you can make use of the search feature. So after you press Shift-A, just type Image or just 3 letters IMA. In this condition, you can use your mouse to select the image texture node. But because the item is already highlighted, you can just press Enter to confirm. Alright, if you already have the image opened by Blender before, you can click this icon to open the image drop-down list. Here, you can also use the search feature. But if the image has not yet opened before, you can click on this folder icon to browse your computer to find the image. Just for example, I want to use this image. Feel free to use any image that you have on your computer. The image is now loaded into Blender. Nothing has happened yet because we haven't connected the node to the main material. Let's connect the color output to the base color. Now we can see the image in a 3D model. At this point, you may be wondering, we are currently using an image texture even though we haven't applied any UV map to our model. How is that possible? Well, this is possible because all newly created primitive objects such as cubes, spheres, planes, etc. all have default UV maps built in. But once you start modeling using these objects, the UV map will start to break. Just to prove this, if we create a cube, and then apply the same material we have for the plane object, we can see that the default UV map of the cube object is working fine. But as we start modeling on the object, such as performing extrude or tweaking the vertex position and so on, you will see how the UV map starts to break down. So, most of the time, after you create a custom 3D model, you need to take care of the UV mapping. That is, if you want to use image texture on that model. Alright, we will discuss UV mapping techniques in later lessons. For now, we will stick with basic 3D objects and their default UV maps. When applying a texture to an object, it is very common that we don't get the perfect placement out of the box. One way to control texture placement is by using the mapping and texture coordinate nodes. These two nodes work hand in hand, so you always see them together. Let's add the mapping node first. Press Shift-A, then type MAPP, then hit Enter. You want to place this next to the image texture. Now, notice if we plug the vector output dot into the vector input of the image texture, this node actually breaks the UV map if we don't use it together with the texture coordinate node. So let's add the node. But now, I want to show you yet another method to add a new node. This method is quick, but you need to know in advance where you want to connect the node. I know that we will be using the texture coordinate node by connecting it from the UV output to the vector input. So I click drag the vector dot in the mapping node and then just release it on an empty area. If you do this, Blender will automatically open the node search panel. We can type in coor and then choose texture coordinate UV. UV is the output dot that we want to use. And there you go. Now we can see the image texture on the object again. I know that this can be a bit confusing at first, but trust me, things will get easier from now on. Also, I need to remind you again that these two nodes are optional. You only need them if you want to control the texture placement from within the shader editor. Most of the time, you don't need these nodes. Without them, Blender uses the object's active UV map by default, which is what most people need. Okay? If we have this setup, we can tweak the texture placement using these parameters in the mapping node. The location X value is for moving the texture left or right relative to the image. The Y value is for moving the texture up or down. Now, the Z value is only useful to control 3D procedural texture. This has no effect if we use 2D image texture. Contrast with the texture rotation. For 2D images, you only want to rotate the texture using the image Z-axis. Rotating the texture using the X or Y-axis may result in a distorted texture. Finally, you can scale the texture using these values. Again, because we are using a 2D image, only the scale X and Y values matter. You can only see the effect of the scale Z value if we are using procedural 3D texture. But to quickly change all of the values, you can click drag like this to select them all and then type in a new value. Please note that if you have the point mode active, the scale value actually works in reverse. It is like defining the amount of tiling. The value of 2 means that there will be 2 tiles horizontally and vertically. 0.5 means that there will be half of the image tile, and so on. Essentially, lower values mean a larger image texture, while higher values mean a smaller texture. If you prefer the other way around, you can change the type to texture. In this mode, smaller scale values mean smaller texture sizes, while bigger values mean bigger texture sizes. Okay, besides tweaking the texture placement, you may also need these 2 nodes setup for more advanced scenarios. We won't be discussing these techniques in this course, but just for an insight, if you are using the particle system to instantiate objects such as grass or pebbles, etc., you can make them extract the UV mapping from the emitter object using this option. Another example is the camera mode. This mode uses the active view or camera as the texture projection, which can be useful for compositing or merging matte paintings into the scene. We have the object mode, where we can use the local coordinate of the object or another object as the reference. This can be very useful for architectural models. The generated mode uses the bounding box of the object to project the texture, and so on. We will discuss them in later videos. Essentially, Blender provides many different ways to map image textures into our scenes or objects, and UV map is just one of them. All of these can be accessed through the texture coordinate node.